Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg. I'm fortunate today to have a guest that I'm really excited to talk with, who I've never had the chance to talk with before, Jeff Siegler from Revitalize or Die. Jeff has actually, I probably had more people suggest Jeff as a guest to me than just about anybody else. So that speaks highly of you. And I have certainly been a fan of some of the work that you put out and the content you put out. So I'm really, really interested to talk today and get to know you a little bit better and what you're working on. So Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me, and a lot of kudos to your other guests for for recommending me. But it's great to have a chance to finally chat, and I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to this. There's a lot of content you put out that's really cool, especially on social media. You're a pretty heavy social media user. I see it more often on Facebook and probably than anywhere else, and a little bit on LinkedIn, I guess too. But before we get too deep into that, I want to have people understand, like, so who is Jeff? Like, how did you get into this whole community development interest? What part of the country are you in, et cetera?
Yeah, yeah. So I grew up in Lima, Ohio, and around Lima is a kind of a struggling Rust Belt community, and in the end, that ended up shaping my work much more than I kind of, you don't understand how your hometown shapes you when you're younger, but
Yeah.
in hindsight, I realized that that's a big part of where my work comes from, and my thinking is just in a town that, the way I always say it, it's like that town was good enough for five generations of my family. Then when it came time for me and my siblings to graduate, my parents were like, "Hey, you probably should move on."
Hmm.
And something that a parent shouldn't have to do. And it's like, well,
Mhm.
what changed? Did all, were we the first generation that was all of a sudden just way too bougie to live in this place? And no, think the punchline. It's the place that changed, and that's not, I don't want to sort of peg Lima as being the one place that changed. That's all of our towns changed, all of these places changed, and not for the better for the most part. The vast majority got worse. So that was kind of my start is growing up there, got my undergrad in economics. And funny thing, I never really thought how economics would play into my work, but I've come to find that, you know, uh, um, the behavioral economics is a huge part of my thinking now, and thinking through things sort of rationally, and trying to understand why people make the decisions they do. Because I find in the world of revitalization, community development, we leap to a lot of conclusions. We are really willing to spread a myth, again and again, that oftentimes don't have any foundation. So that's been an interesting part of my work more than I ever realized. Ended up going to school for urban planning down at Virginia Commonwealth University and got my
Hmm.
master's. And while I was there, I worked for a developer. And also like a huge experience to see he was a tax credit developer,
Hmm.
and we would renovate old buildings, and that was my first experience of how when you changed the built environment, you changed the people. That it really had an impact, that you could change the way a block looked and felt about itself in essence. And so that was really just sort of this fantastic kind of flashpoint in my career. So when that sparked an interest in revitalization, worked as a Main Street manager for a couple of years, ran the Ohio Main Street program for about 10 years before moving to Pittsburgh and really diving into, and got into consulting, in essence,
Yeah.
started writing a lot. And that really turned into Revitalize or Die, and turned into a whole kind of fascinating career where just in writing, I got to express some of my frustrations, and led to people reaching out and saying, "Hey, can you come and talk to us about some of these topics? We need to hear it." So it's been incredible.
Yeah. It's a funny thing how just sometimes following that interest and with the tools that we have available today to actually express yourself to a large amount of people, that you can actually turn that into something a successful business if you know what you're doing.
It is wild. I mean, in essence, it's like, oh, I started talking trash online, and that led to, a whole career, and I'm thankful for that.
So let's talk a little bit about revitalization. I guess where I want to start, there's a lot of things, a lot of things that come to mind. But what are some of the ways that you've had a long enough career now that you've seen probably as much failure as success when it comes to revitalization? What are some obvious ways that you see communities fail when they're trying to improve themselves?
For the one that comes immediately to mind is assuming that growth equates to improvement. And I think that economic development has had this unfortunate effect on the mass, of nearly all of us, but particularly electeds, to think that, if we just grow, things will get better. And there's
Mm.
absolutely no proof of that. In fact, I think there's plenty of proof to the contrary, that growth does not equate to improvement. And oftentimes, I'll kill a bunch of analogies today while we're on here, because
Sure.
I,
Yeah.
I find them overly useful. But it's as if saying, gaining weight is somehow healthy. Like,
Yeah.
no, there's gaining muscle is healthy, and a community can grow in a way that is improvement. But if you only grow in terms of sprawl, if all your growth is national chains and national developers, then you're actually getting less and less healthy, less resilient, less self-reliant, less attractive. So I think that if there was one place I would really say that communities screw up this idea of improvement the most, is just thinking that growing is improving, and it's just not the case.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of I grew up in a couple of small towns in the Midwest, one in Minnesota and one in Missouri, and neither one of them has probably appreciably grown in population in, let's say, 100 years, but they've all expanded physically to probably twice the original footprint of the city from 100 years ago, and that's just such a common thing in rural communities.
Yeah, it takes me back. Gosh, my last meeting before COVID was in Peoria, Illinois, and that was the conversation we had. Peoria, in 1920, the population was 100,000. In 2020, the population was 100,000. Yet
Yeah,
the footprint had tripled. And I asked the question, in what way does that make anything better? And you can't really answer. I mean, in fact, in fact, it makes everything worse.
yeah.
That require, for the same amount of people, you require, you know, three times as much infrastructure, and then you add in all those spaces, and then that's going to be national chains, national developers, parking, travel time, commute time. Loss of farmland, and on and on and on. Like, there's just zero upside
Hmm.
to that sort of growth. And the thing that really gets me, I too try to remember too, like, you can look at all the economics, but what really is a killer is, like, a kid can't bike to a fishing hole anymore.
Yeah.
You can't go, you can't bike to a place to go for a swim, or just go to the countryside anymore, because you're so spread out, you're so disconnected from the natural environment, when you've got to traverse 5 miles of strip malls to experience, like, the natural world. And that's really a much bigger cost than I sometimes we think give credit to.
Yeah, and it's weird because it takes what in many ways are like the advantages that a lot of smaller towns have. Sense of community, and there's a sense of community that comes from being compact, where people do get to know each other. And I know that can get stifling as well, but the reality is that's a benefit in general, being in a smaller place, is and the ability to for a kid to ride a bike anywhere. But when you spread it all out, it almost turns into just like cheaper, crappier versions of suburbs in big cities.
It's true. It is absolutely true. And I think there's a real benefit to, you kind of say, well, maybe everybody's in everyone's business, or it can be stifling, but
Yeah,
there's a real societal benefit to knowing what
yeah,
everybody's up to. I think
yeah,
that there's a benefit to societal pressure, and that social contract is a little more in your face, of how
yeah.
you are meant to behave, and what society deems acceptable. Like, that benefits us all as a whole. But when we're all spread out, I think a lot more falls through the cracks, and there's a lot less pressure. There's a lot less, standards start to decline, and that's not good for anybody. That doesn't benefit us. So, yeah, I think that that's The other thing I run into that's been interesting along those lines is, I work in a lot of rural areas, and now so much of rural identity is that we're spread out. We're spread out. We don't need to live close to one another. And it's like, well, that's hmm. I don't know that I completely agree, and I understand that that is very much. Um, we still need density,
Mhm.
even in rural's not even. Towns can't be rural. Sorry to jump around a little bit, but like rural is a landscape. It's not a town can't be rural by definition when you have, homes together. That's urban, but we've really kind of bastardized these terms for rural to mean, hey, that's just a smaller population. And urban is always painted as this, megatropolis with all the problems. And it's like, no, no, no. When people live together, it's still urban, but we need that amount of density even in smaller towns because we always had it, or everybody's great grandparents had density.
Mhm.
They had walkability, and it's just become such a political hot button issue, and these terms have really become people's identity, and that it's hard to overcome that, even though people still will always need those places where you can go and walk around and be close to one another. Like that's a must for humans.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun. So there's a blogger called Addison Del Mastro who I subscribe to and read his stuff. Does has a really nice Substack, but he's written about this exact phenomenon quite a bit. Like there's we make this weird distinction between urban and rural. The reality is like every town in the country, they were all urban.
Right.
They just what happened is they most of them grew to a certain point and stopped. Um,
Hmm.
and we're at maybe a much smaller point, whereas larger cities just kept growing. But 100 years ago, there was really no physical difference between like living in a small town and living in a big city in many respects.
Agreed, and I've definitely found in my work that a neighborhood in a big city functions exactly like a small town. It's the same thing. It's just there's a bunch of them near one another, but where you live doesn't fundamentally change your DNA, and
Yeah,
how our brain works. Like
yeah,
people are the people no matter where they live, and that's been kind of a something that I have found incredibly useful to keep in mind in my work, that we're all the same. We all have the same values. We all want the same things in our lives. It's just you might live in a different place, but you still want the kids to be safe. You still want to have a little independence. You still want to go out and have fun and have friends. Like that doesn't change from
yeah,
big city to small town.
yeah. So when I read your work, one of the things that I really appreciate about it, I feel like you're that. Everybody has this, most of your friends that are just kind of cheerleaders for whatever you're doing, right? So, like, if you drink too much, they're like, "Oh no, you don't have a drinking problem. You're fine. That fifth of bourbon you had last night, no big deal." Um, but every so often, you have like a really good friend who like gives you the tough love, and they're like, "No, Jeff, you got a drinking problem. You need to look in the mirror and maybe do something about it." And when I read your work, I feel like it's that friend that really cares about places that's willing to give like the tough love a little bit about to people who are in the communities and everything else. I wonder if what do you think about that? Is you feel like that's a fair statement?
Um, it's interesting because I have like gained this reputation of being, brash or harsh, and I think it was the mayor of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and he's like, "Oh God, when I heard you were coming to town, I felt it was like that feeling when the preacher stops by your house." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't like, no, I don't, I'm not, I don't feel like I'm the tough love guy, but what I do, I've become very aware of the fact that is if we don't have these hard conversations, if we're not willing to upset a few people, we in essence disappoint thousands. If somebody's not willing to go to one of the board members that never shows up or never follows through and says, "Hey, you're not doing your job," or another way to put it, it's like if we don't uphold a standard for a couple, then in essence we fail everybody. So I do think that there's an urgency to this idea of revitalization. I do think that standards are absolutely critical, and so that we have to be willing to be honest about these things. Like, look, I know I can be hard on the chamber or tourism, all those, there's those people that work in those industries are wonderful, and I work with them all the time. But I don't want to overlook the fact that those entities oftentimes are outdated, that their mission statements haven't kept up with the times. And so, I could sort of always play nice and never bring that up. But that was sort of the liberation of going out on my own, is being able to say, like, tourism doesn't make your town better. Yes, there's dollars that are generated, by bringing in visitors, but it doesn't make anybody that lives in your town love it more. Bringing in additional jobs doesn't make anyone love their town anymore. That's investment, that's fine, but that's not what we're struggling with. We're struggling with apathy. We're struggling with resident apathy, and that's the real problem. So if I feel like I have a bit of responsibility to be honest about that. Otherwise, it's going to keep on, we're going to
Yeah.
keep perpetuating these same problems. Like we've had 40 some years of sort of here's our approach to community development, and I think it's been a failure. And so I do feel that it is I feel an obligation to call that out, even if it can hurt some people's feelings, because how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of people suffer if their community never gets better.
Yeah, and there's still even in smaller places, there's that desire for, like the silver bullet project that is going to save the town, no matter what it is. So it might be, in years past, it used to be we're going to plat an industrial park on the edge of town, and
Yeah.
we're gonna bring in companies from all over the world who want to build plants here. Or it might be a big tourism. We're swinging for the fences with a big tourism deal, or it might even be, I've been in places where it's like we're going to build a highway bypass around the town. That's a big piece of transportation infrastructure that's going to change everything and bring prosperity. So it's a curious thing that even in really struggling places, people still kind of look for that one big project to make it all better.
It is. It's absolutely ingrained. I mean, it's kind of absolutely ingrained in our thinking about community development, that because I think it's easier to sell. It's like, hey, if you just hit the grand slam every once in a while, everything's fixed, and we're here to sell you the grand slam. Like, and what isn't easy to sell is you need to hit a bunch of singles. Like, you're gonna have to take some walks sometime.
Hmm.
And the truth of the matter is, I mean, I look at it as, no one's going to go on TV and sell you, hey, I've got this ultimate workout plan for you. You have to go to the gym every day forever.
And you have
That's
to eat
that's
right.
not
Yeah.
right. Right. Turns out you have to give up the food that you really like and then go to the gym all the time. Oh, and by the way, I know how you can get rich. uh, Work harder and save more money. Like that's not a very sexy thing to sell, and nobody would buy that. And that's the truth of revitalization is you've got to improve the built environment perpetually forever. Bit by bit, a little bit every day. You have to improve the built environment. That's, who gets rich off of that? Who's gonna sell that? That's not gonna make any firms any money. And so I think that that's why we've kind of glommed onto this silver bullet, silver bulletitis, that there has to be some sort of solution that's big and easy, that doesn't involve just constantly working and toiling away at this simple
Mhm.
thing. But yeah, you know diet pills are fake, and you should also know that the parking garage panacea is just as fake.
Yeah. So what are some of those like singles and walks that you talk to people about that you think are important when they think about revitalization?
Um, just the flowers. I mean, honestly, like if you want to go to the real basics, like flowers. I mean, I think back to my early career in Main Street, and how often I'd run into people that were like, "Oh, it's putting lipstick on a pig." Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with a little lipstick on a pig? I mean, like beauty matters. Beauty matters. Of course, flowers matter. Like that's why we paint our homes. That's why we go and buy flowers or buy flowers and put them in our house. That's why we get haircuts. That's why we buy new shirts, etc. Like we do these things because we understand that it makes us feel better when our appearance improves, and um, appearance doesn't stop at in the mirror. It's like we understand, we look in the mirror, this is our personal appearance. It is our hair, it is our face, it's our choice what clothes we want to wear. But it goes beyond that. We understand appearance matters when it comes to our home. That affects us, how our curb appeal, what people think when they drive past. But it even more so, if you're proud of your home, you feel good about yourself. You tend to it, you maintain it. It's a part of your image and identity. And then so is your block, and so is your downtown, and so is your city. So there's this really fascinating thing that I've kind of stumbled upon. It's like, man, our self-image is not just tied to the mirror. It's our home. It's everything. It's all of our surroundings. So the flowers matter, and paint matters, and all those things. Like if you want the simplest and most straightforward way to improve your community, to start hitting singles, like improve the built environment a little bit every day forever. And that's simply put, like again, you want to feel great about yourself. Those are a bunch of decisions about how you eat and you know, you're working out. And if you want to feel paid the best you can about your community, make it look nicer every day, because that's in essence, that's your community's, not only is it your community's outward expression of who it is, but it's also your identity. You know, like it's when you walk into one of the, to carry this out, one of the great epiphanies I had was finally realizing that, like, we don't travel to see pretty things, we travel to feel pretty.
Hmm.
You know, when you go to a beautiful restaurant, it changes how you feel. It's not just that you sit in there, like the ambiance becomes you. You feel more elegant, you feel more sophisticated. When you walk down a beautiful street, you feel different. You're not just staring at different, you know, you're not just staring at attractive things. It literally changes the way you feel. And that's where I think the power of the built environment comes into this work, is when a community is extremely, you know, when a community looks beautiful, people are proud of it. And I've literally seen this carry out time and time again, where when a community improves and becomes more attractive, the people's relationship to it entirely changes. And it's I think that that is the greatest news ever, because that's a simple thing to fix. It's not easy, but at least it's straightforward. It's not a mystery.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of we have a part of town here in Kansas City. It's called Country Club Plaza, which is a 100-plus-year-old shopping district that's pretty famous in the urbanism world, I guess. One of the original suburban quote unquote shopping districts, though you would never know it today because it's actually very urban today. But it was built with sort of Spanish colonial architecture. It's very beautiful. It's always been known as like a really cool, beautiful part of town. And the funny thing is, like the same exact people, you know, that I know, if they're going out to hang out down there on the plaza versus if they're going to hang out in another part of town, you dress up. You know, everybody just dresses better inherently. Like nobody told them to, but you just there's this instant recognition, like this is a nicer part of town, and in large part because it's just more beautiful, and people kind of raise their own standards.
So this is, you know, where like the absolute favorite thing. I love this. I'm obsessed with this, but 100% this is us adapting to our design telling us how to behave, which is always how it works. You know, it's like the Um, you know, speed limit doesn't tell you how fast to drive. It's how wide the road
Mm,
is, and things like that. Like we're, you know, it's not like somebody that lives in suburbia. When you take somebody from suburbia and drop into Manhattan, they didn't all of a sudden decide that they're a more walk. You know, they're like
yeah.
their walkable DNA didn't change. The design there it forces you to walk more, and not forces you, even like allows you and compels you to walk more, because of the design. And when you know, man, you ever walk into a beautiful lobby and you're like, shh,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
like, I mean, you do it. We always do that. We take on hushed tones when you enter a gorgeous hotel lobby, or yeah, or you walk into a place and like, oh my God, like how fancy am I right
Yeah.
now? You know, it's like, ah, this British accent came out of nowhere. And I think that's fascinating, that is absolutely, you know, the our built environment telling us how to behave. And the problem is there's so few of those places anymore that make us feel elegant, sophisticated, grown up, or I think the best word too is dignified. You know,
Mm,
nobody feels dignified in Dollar General. You can't. You
hmm.
simply can't feel dignified there, and that's almost all we have left. And so I don't. There's a lot of finger pointing that I think that we do, where it's like, oh, kids these days, society these days, people these days, they're not civil, they're not civic minded, they, you know, blah blah blah, whatever you want to call it. It's like, why should we be? You know, like why should we behave nice if all we have is
Hmm.
Dollar General? Like it's not, we didn't change. If we all were transported back to our grandparents' towns, we'd all be more civil and civic and friendly, and you know, we'd all be more community minded. But and if they were transported here, you know, if yeah, if I don't know, if all our grandparents had to shop in Dollar General,
Yeah.
they'd probably wear more sweatpants.
Yeah. Who knows? So I imagine then for most of your work, are you concentrating your interest in sort of the Rust Belt area, Ohio, Pennsylvania, et cetera? Is that your primary interest, or do you go anywhere?
No, no, it really work all over the country, and
Okay.
so a lot of my work recently has been seems to have been in the Great Plains. Yeah, I've been in Nebraska and Kansas and
Hmm,
Arkansas, going up to Idaho soon. But no, I kind of am fortunate to work. I've done a lot of work in Florida recently, but no, I seem to nearly never work in my own neck of the woods. But
interesting.
no, my work it fortunately takes me all over the country.
How do you think about doing this kind of work in the different regions of the country? Like, and I think about it more from a standpoint of there are regions that are growing, and adding population. The southeast, for example, is growing pretty extensively. The southwest as well. But then there are also large regions like a lot of the Midwest. I'm in the Great Plains. We have big, like Kansas City's growing, but most of the smaller communities are not. Um, and in the upper Midwest, it's kind of a similar deal. You might have a couple of big cities that are growing. Columbus has been growing a lot in Ohio, but most of the rest of the region is not. How does that impact your thinking about how to talk with people?
Um, I have found, certainly earlier in my career, there was always that worry of like, I mean, God, right before the holidays, I spent like 3 days in the town of 400 in eastern Montana,
Hmm.
and there is always that worry. It's like, how's this message going to go here? Or are you like, oh, the here's this guy coming in from Pittsburgh, and what I've found is like people are people, and the message is really the same. Like I don't have this. I don't have any sort of grand wisdom. Like I just really try to be cognizant through all of my work to pay attention to people, to be very just cognizant of like human behavior and my own feelings. And so the work hasn't changed. Really, the message does not change from, I mean, boy, I can be in extremely sort of liberal communities, and I've worked in some of the most, it's conservative places you can imagine. And again, there's always some worry that's like, oh, how's this message going to go over? But when you speak to human nature, when you speak to the human experience, it doesn't change. It doesn't change from small to big, from cold weather to warm weather. Like people are
Hmm.
people, and that has really been, I think, the big thing that I've figured out in work is that we really economic development, I think, has forced us to deny human nature so often and tell us like what that our feelings don't matter, and that's crazy. At the end of the day, like the people that live in communities are all human, and so we should probably serve them. And when you embrace that, like the work becomes significantly easier. You don't have to have an advanced degree to know how you feel.
Hmm.
But boy, there are certainly a lot of people in the industry that want to think because yeah, because I wear a quarter zip and can play golf. I probably know more about community and economic development than you do. And it's like, well, I just haven't found that to be the case.
What are some of the communities where you've been to where you feel like they're doing some things right, and that you can point to as good examples or as inspiration for others?
Sure, sure. And then jumping back to that last bit, though, I do really think that at the end of the day, the important thing to remember is that your clients, customers, whatever you want to call them, they're people, and people are emotional, and we do tend to run towards these fiscal solutions and these solutions that on paper might sound right, but if it's not emotional, like cities are emotional and people are emotional, and you can't break it down to just numbers. That's car companies understand that they're an emotional business. Like every corporation understands that they've got to make an emotional connection to their customer if they want to make money. And the only people that don't seem to get that are in the field of in our field
Yeah,
somehow, which is crazy. And it's like,
yeah.
nah, that should be we should be the field that embraces that more than any other. So I mentioned Hattiesburg. I've been pretty impressed. Like I love what they've been doing, and um, that there's Hattiesburg's a funny example that I really appreciate. There's an alley in the middle of town. I won't remember the name, but that's like it's nothing overly complicated that happened. but it's also like the emotional heart of the community. Like there's these little windows with little figures in it. There's lots of paint. There's like it's whimsical. There's just one alley through the center of town that's extremely whimsical, and that has been such a big deal. And it's hard to describe, but it's like it's funny because it's not huge. It was not a multi-million-dollar investment, quite the opposite. But it's a bit of whimsy in a place that connects with people, that needs it, and it connects with people emotionally. And so that's been really cool to see how. And I don't know, I like seeing that we had some really good meetings, and I get a cool message afterwards from somebody on the planning board that somebody had proposed an enormous project there. It was like a $42 million development. And at first they're like, yes, whatever you want to do. And then they came back to him and kind of, he said that we thought back to their conversation about standards and said, no, we're not going to swipe right on everything. Uh, no, you can come here if you do these things. Like we want this to be a certain way. And the developer was like, okay, we'll do that. Like we can meet those needs. And it's just really cool. It was a great conversation too, or it was, fun to hear later that they held on to that and said, we're going to hold ourselves to a higher standard because if you say yes to everything, eventually you don't have anything. And I liked that was getting to experience that, them getting a better result because they stuck to their guns a bit.
Yeah, that's a interesting challenge. Kind of talked about that before on other podcasts, but one of the real challenges, like you mentioned, it's a very human challenge. If you're in a struggling place at all, you really want to say yes. Somebody wants to do something, you're like, yeah, bring it on, do it, go for it. But not everything is worthy of saying yes to. And so, like, how do you address that kind of human instinct to just say we're going to accept uh, whatever anybody wants to do?
I try to point out that no institution, individual, or business is ever improved by lowering its standards. And you have to raise them and be patient, and you just can't get better by lowering them. And that's become a really dominant way of thinking. I think over the last 40 years of, hey, we don't want to interfere with business, so we're not going to ask anything of them. We're going to get rid of any bureaucracy, any red tape, any design guidelines, et cetera. We're going to throw it all out and watch the development pour in. And it's like, well, that's the most backwards thing I've ever heard. As if MIT said, "Hey, we're going to get rid of all SAT requirements and GPA requirements, and that's how we're going to become a better university." Like you can tell how irrational that sounds, and that's what we've done. And it's like, no, you're misunderstanding, and there's some politics behind that.
Hmm.
I really did believe that there's politics behind trying to lower those standards because if you want to build something cheap, if you want to profit as much as possible, you're going to want to get rid of standards. And that's fine. That's how capitalism works. But don't be on the losing end of it. Your community doesn't have to say yes to that. It's like having the neighbors come over and tell you how to parent. Like, no, we'll get this. And having a national chain come in and tell you what kind of standards you should have is asinine. And so it's really depressed communities, I think, because things have gotten uglier, they've gotten sort of cheaper, they've gotten more run down, all by lowering standards, and you have to hold firm because what you see the economics bear out that communities with the highest standards have the highest property values. They have no problem, attracting and retaining talent. They have no problem with any of these things. So there's this mix up of risk and red tape. And I think that a lot of electeds believe that businesses are scared of red tape. And it's like, no, investors aren't scared of red tape. In fact, they're scared of risk, and red tape mitigates risk. So it's not to say all red tape is great,
Hmm.
but boy, you better have some. We're seeking to mitigate risk, and design standards mitigate risk, like certain standards in general. So, again, to kill an analogy, it's like if there were zero rules to the road and nobody needed a driver's license, God, you'd never see me, I would never
Yeah,
go out there.
yeah,
That would be far too risky. So the way that we try to make driving safe, which obviously we know never will be, but we have some standards, we have rules, we have regulations that try to make that safe for all to participate in.
yeah. How have you ever? I mean, as a former Main Street manager and running the Ohio Main Street, how do you felt like striking that balance between not too much red tape, but make sure that you have some standards as a community?
I feel like everybody, we're all in a continuum.
Yeah.
That you doesn't matter whether if you're at the even if you're at the lowest, if you're in the economically worst place you can be, you still have to nudge it up. You still have to, you know, and at the beginning, like start with incentives. It doesn't have to cost a bunch. You can use incentives. You can use volunteer labor. It doesn't. It can be hard when you're in the economic pits to start with, hey, we're gonna put really high design standards on this. Like, no, I get that that doesn't work, but what you could do is nudge in the right direction. Do public campaigns of, hey, this person did great, or we can get you some volunteers to come and scrape paint or help pull weeds. Like, you can always start somewhere, even if you're, let's say, let's say you're in the worst health that you could possibly be. It doesn't mean that you can't get better. Yeah, you can't run a marathon, and I think this is sometimes where we screw up. Like, I, I have I have certainly ticked off some friends that work in the planning field, and what I'll say is a plan isn't for everybody. There's a ton of communities that can use it.
Yeah.
All right, like 99% of us could use a fitness plan, but LeBron James doesn't need, like, he needs a specialized one. Like, that guy needs a specialized plan. Like, most communities just need to get better, but those that are really, really good need a special plan that's much more in the specifics. And so I guess I look at it that way. It's like no matter where you are, that you can get better just by doing certain things, by connecting people socially, by cleaning things up, by planting flowers, pulling weeds, etc. Um, you could you That's a pretty, there's just some straightforward things, again, like as an individual, go, even if you're in the worst health ever, get up, go for, do what you can to go for a walk. Maybe it's around the couch tomorrow, maybe it's around the block, maybe, but it's not giving you this marathon plan. And I think too often we try to give communities the marathon plan when they're not in that place, when they're still in the apathy place. And we need to start with smaller wins. Again, that's the pull some weeds, plant some flowers, scrape the paint, like feel a little bit better, like
Yeah.
get a haircut, get at least buy a new sport coat. Like, you can do these small things that are going to make you feel good enough tomorrow that the next day maybe you can try something bigger.
So one of the other themes that I know you've written a lot about is just the importance of local ownership and local entrepreneurship, especially no matter how big the community. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about like the challenge of that in an age where so much is dominated by national corporations. I always find it like it boggles the mind to me that there aren't people in every town who can essentially be a dollar store, right?
Right.
There's no magic or mystery to what a dollar store does, but we all wait for the dollar store chain to come in and be that entity, dollar whoever they are, whichever one of the chains. And I know that crosses the line of a lot of different businesses, but it's fascinating how much that kind of local entrepreneurship has really withered. And you write a lot about how important it is to build that back up.
It really is, and there's so many reasons for that. One, that there's pride in local. Like, it's the example I always use. Like, I don't wash the rental car before I take it back. Like,
Yeah,
that's how we are, and that's inherent in us. But because that thing is not permanently yours, it's cared for, and it's not your identity. Yet the car that you own is part of your identity, so you want to take care of it. And there was a, still to this day kind of haunts me, and I'm gonna forget her name, unfortunately, but it was during a tumultuous period, during Ferguson and um I'm sorry, George Floyd, and this woman said, God, everybody's freaking out about the target. Like, why do we care about the target? Like, why, how is that? Like, that's an outsider coming in our community to take our money, and you're upset that the target got burnt. And I'm not trying to justify vandalism, but I absolutely understand what she was getting at, because like it's not of us. It doesn't matter. This is not. No one's proud. No one calls up their friend like, oh my God, Panera just opened up, but you can't believe it. Let's all go down and see the Panera. That's not of our community, and we're all aware that that's an outside entity that's come in to extract, and that's different. Like, there's a different sense of pride that comes from working for yourself or your friend or your neighbor, that comes from working for a local business that's striving that improves the community versus working at TGI Friday because you're very well aware of what you're doing at TGI Friday. You know that you're just there, that you're a faceless cog in the extraction machine. So there's a huge part of pride that comes with local, of getting to work for a local business, but then that local business also puts back into the community it's not, it is financial, but it also is emotional, it is spiritual, and it's pride. And so, I think too often that economic development is kind of focused on how do we bring back big manufacturing. At least that's the way it used to be. That,
Mm.
hey, let's look at the 50s and 60s when we had these big plants, and that's when
Yeah.
our economic heyday was. Let's return that. And I always think like, no, the 20s were better because then people actually had there was a lot more entrepreneurship, there were a lot more local
Yeah.
developers, there was a
Hmm.
lot, you could graduate high school and realistically, like, I don't know, build something or become a grocer or become a
Right.
hotelier or become a florist or become a shoe, own a shoe store. Like, all these things were wide open. It wasn't, hey, graduate, move away, or either graduate and move away and go to college so that you can work in middle management for an insurance company, or stay here and do kind of a low skill trade at a big factory.
Yeah.
Like, we lost all that infrastructure of people being entrepreneurial, and that's what we need. That's what we desperately need again. So that every town, every town, we don't. It's. I don't think that we have the current sort of thinking to compel people to make sure. God, there's a lot of different ways. I'm trying to think of the right way to say it. Like, your average high school student it doesn't dawn on them that they could have a dollar store competitor
Right.
or a
Yeah.
replacement.
Yeah.
Like, because we're not teaching that. And I
Right.
don't think that they're empowered yet. That's what we desperately need is, I mean, you look at real estate development again. We
Oh
need
yeah.
we need millions of local developers. But boy, that's the hurdles to do that today seem to be a lot more than what they used to be. Like, we've retooled our entire economic infrastructure around big and national at the cost of small and local.
Yeah, I one of the things that used to drive me a little crazy when I used to design like new communities, a couple decades ago, was you work with really great developers, people I loved working with, super smart, very successful people, and you'd immediately start planning like your commercial center, and the default would be for like a Walgreens or a CVS, or something like that, or like the local chain grocery store, whoever that is. And I think I understand that, I get why you're going there, but how come you can't find like a local entrepreneur? Is there a store manager in a local CVS who you could train up and help, back with some investment to actually start their own drugstore and be successful, as opposed to just deferring to the? And again, I understand all the reasons why people do it. It's easier, it's quicker, and you get a national credit tenant who pays the rent. But it really, we miss it a lot by not encouraging that kind of entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. I think of it. I mean, Jane Jacobs said it, that when all we have is, new construction, all we'll have is national
Yeah,
tenants,
yeah.
because the local tenants aren't capitalized well enough. And yet, no one's ever traveled anywhere to see a new development. No one's
Yeah.
ever moved to a city because of their new, the new mall or whatever. Like, those things are heartless and soulless, and they don't capture people emotionally. They don't have any meaning. And so, while it's an investment, again, it's an investment in getting worse. You've spent money on literally becoming a worse place. It's these old places that matter. I mean, I don't recall who this speaker was. They pointed out though that, go to any city and the top 20 restaurants are all in old buildings.
Yeah.
You'll
Right.
never find, the best restaurants in the city in a new building, because good restaurateurs know that the surroundings matter, that the ambiance matters. So, yeah, you can't you new places don't tend to be any good. They don't attract new people. They don't connect with people emotionally. Yet that's where we put all our time and thought and effort into, is trying to build more of that. And, like, you literally can't make a 200-acre site any good.
Yeah.
Like, it's like trying, have you ever been to a banquet with great food? Like, it's hard to make great food for 1,000 people, and I think it's hard to develop hundreds and hundreds of acres at a time with quality. Like, it kind of, the idea of quality is being slow and patient and intentional and using, great materials. And it's hard to make a meal fast, a good meal fast, and it's hard to build a nice place fast. And that's what we're kind of obsessed with.
well, there's a direct analogy between like the 1,000 unit subdivision and the mega farm and the mega church, and it all kind of rolls together with 20th century industrialization in a lot of ways. I wonder, one of the things that I've thought about, uh, I've heard some other people write about this, but as you think, especially about a lot of towns that are really struggling today, but they have maybe a heritage where they had a cool main street, or a small downtown that still has the physical character to it. It almost seems like we've come full circle to, uh, like back to the pioneer days in a lot of ways. That the in, the mentality that might attract some people to places like that is a pioneering mentality. You can go to a place like this and create something of value, and create almost certainly create more easily than you can in a big city, and it might have a lot of the qualities that you're lacking in a big city. I wonder if you've ever thought about that kind of notion, that it seems like we've come full circle where a lot of these towns were, they were pioneered, they matured, they grew, and then they declined, and now it's like we almost need that same spirit again for people in those places.
Absolutely, and it's been heartening and rewarding, and sort of gives some optimism to see. And I guess to think about it this way, it's like, would you rather work at the Coors factory in Columbus, Ohio, or Anheuser-Busch, whatever it is, or would you rather go back to your hometown and brew beer and run your own brewery? And I think that we've figured out, like, oh, one is going to be infinitely more rewarding. One's going to give you more of a reward in life. And I think that that's something that's sort of we've figured out, that there's not much satisfaction in being a cog in a huge national chain in the extraction industry. That's immensely unsatisfying, and that there's a lot of benefit. There's a lot of reward and satisfaction in doing something where you produce something, where you make something with your hands, or you create something that you can share locally, that you can at the end see the tangible results of, be it your own restaurant or your own beer or your own art or crafts, or your own real estate development. Like
Yeah,
I think we've hit some sort of point where it's just growth, bigger, better, more money, et cetera, isn't as hasn't held the allure that we were always promised, and that's tremendous. I mean, that's great news. And yeah, you can go back to your hometown, and that's a really cool thing that I've gotten to enjoy in this work, is meeting people that have gone back to their hometown to make a difference. I mean, Alan Branch down
yeah,
in Panama
right.
City, going back home and becoming a developer. Now Alan's running for mayor. And man, his campaign is incredible. And friends of Justin Hummel over in Bloomsburg
Yeah,
moved back to Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania from
Justin and I,
Charleston.
we were in Rotary together in Savannah,
No
Georgia.
way.
Yeah,
Where?
in Savannah, Georgia.
Savannah, that's it. No
Yeah,
way, that's crazy.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, small world. I had no idea.
Yeah, Justin's an awesome
Savannah.
guy. Yeah, yeah.
He is, and yeah, he moved back home to take over his dad's brewery, and now he's mayor.
Uh huh.
And it's really, these are fascinating people that would do well anywhere they are, but I think they've all realized that, Ron Skillstead out in Leavenworth, Washington's going back home and I keep meeting these people, and it's like they traded in kind of the more average big city life to play a larger role in this place that shaped them. And I love seeing it, and they're doing great work. And I think that they've found that their quality of life is higher that way.
Yeah.
So, walking around, like walking into town and seeing everybody they know, and having these close connections, and the things
Yeah.
that you don't realize when you're younger you want so much and need.
Yeah, and that might be a phase that some of us just have to go through to kind of learn what we value or what we don't value. I was going to ask, so it's interesting you said that, because what I was going to ask you was like, what in your travels have you seen that gives you hope? That gives you the most hope for a lot of places like this. And so obviously, there's some of that as people who rediscover their oon hometowns. But what else? What else have you seen that really inspires you?
Um, I guess that oh man, this sounds so self-serving, but like more and more people reach out and feel this. Yeah, I sound completely. I don't
No,
mean
no,
this
that's
in
cool.
an arrogant way, but like
I know where you're
that
going with it. So
that more and more people are sort of disillusioned with the field as it stands with tourism or economic development or chamber, that I get phone calls and emails all the time from people that are like, hey, this isn't working. We're ready to try something new. We're ready to do something different. That there is um, that not everybody wants more growth. I mean, like nobody loves sprawl. Here's the thing, like
Mm,
no, I've never talked to anybody that loves sprawl, but these communities keep doing it. And so I think more and more people are sort of becoming growing increasingly aware that the way that we're doing things isn't working. And man, it's really cool to get to go to these places and have some of these conversations and really see, like, really feel like you connect and have people come up afterwards and
mhm.
share their stories and um what I always hear, it's like you've expressed something that I felt for a long time. And so I'm fortunate to get to do this and to get to connect with people that way and feel like I get to assist them in a way of carrying on their work. So I'm heartened all the time. I'm heartened all the time by the people that adore me. Like that's just um no, like it's I'm seeing that as younger people get into more positions of authority, that these things are getting better, that there's more attention to, plays, the quality to social life. I mean, that's a big one. Like, yeah, I talk to more and more people that are like, we don't need more cars here. We want to have more
Mm.
friends. We want to feel closer. And that's fantastic.
Do you feel like there's a generational shift there, that's a big element of it?
Yeah, I do. I do think that there's more attention paid. At least this is what I am experiencing, that um younger people are more aware of quality of life issues and not just so consumed with kind of the economics, that they're willing to trade in a higher salary for more enjoyment in their life. And
Mhm.
I think that's the really key to this work. And that's really going to be key to revitalization is you don't having a six-figure job in a mid-sized city, and kind of being stuck in the suburbs and not having friends and having this commute time, is that there's no happiness in that whatsoever, even though we've painted it that way.
Yeah.
Like we've tried our corporate America has tried really hard to make that pitch and continues to do so, but it's people are seeing through that and realize like, oh, my life is happier when it's a little simpler.
Yeah, and of course, the irony being in a lot of smaller communities, you don't need to chase those two six-figure incomes to have a really really high quality of life. You can do that on a whole lot less and see people get to know people on a pretty intimate level. Uh,
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's I've been thinking a lot about that lately, like as we've become more and more obsessed with everything that's happening in Washington. It's like
mhm,
most of us don't have the ability to affect change there.
right.
But what we do have the ability is to affect change on our block and in
Mhm,
our neighborhood,
yep.
and our lives will be immensely better when we make our communities better, when we have more friends, when our street becomes prettier. Like we can all have much, much better lives. So, certainly fight your political fight, whatever side you're on, but don't do it at the cost of trying to make your own block a bit better because that's where you live. And in
Yeah.
essence, politics, when your block gets better, politics improves as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. It kind of ties to a conversation I had recently with Seth Kaplan, where we talked around that whole idea that really a whole lot of civic culture just starts at your block level and works up from there. Jeff, for people who are interested in getting to know you more or getting to know more about your work, how do you do your work, and how should they reach out to you?
Sure. Well, I post every day on LinkedIn and Facebook. LinkedIn, of course, Jeff Sigler. Facebook, Revitalize or Die. Most of my writing can be found on my website at revitalizeordie.com. And so there you can find, I write a lot, and my blog posts are up there. But then also I do a lot of public speaking. I do, community visits and civic assessments and civic pride workshops and all these things. So you can find that all out on my website. And then also, I would encourage anybody to pick up Your City is Sick. So, I wrote my first book about a year and a half ago, and that was a pretty amazing experience. And
Hmm.
in essence, it's a book about how much of our health is tied to our space, to our communities, and that the healthcare industry. is large. It's immense, because it's focused on, how do we treat one person at a time,
Hmm.
and we don't have to treat one person at a time. In essence, as our communities improve, as our cities become healthier, all the residents become healthier in turn. So
Yeah.
that's like we need to put a lot more thought into how we improve our communities as a whole, and a little less obsession with the interiors of our homes and our individual health, and think more collectively. So,
Yeah.
so those are some ways to find me.
And one thing I did notice, like on your Facebook, you have these groups now that are also doing like group chats. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, so that is a very recent thing. I think maybe in the past month. Um, I don't know if somebody suggested it or what happened, or if it was just, I can't remember where it sprung from, but I decided to uh, create a group, and I called it the Revitalize or Die Roundtable. And I mean, within a week, it was up to 1,000 members, and now it's up to like 1,500. And the conversation that is going on in there is amazing, and it is truly like it's one of the most rewarding and inspiring things I've ever seen, because people are sharing so much, and really being kind and generous with their thoughts and words, and helpful, and like asking questions, and it's a community. Online communities aren't always the healthiest, so it's really, really, again, it's inspiring to
Yeah.
watch the conversations that are taking place there, and I can't even keep up with it. Like every time I go on there, it's like, oh my God, what is taking place, and all these thoughtful, caring people that are willing to try to help one another out. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately that's the goal. If you can't keep up with it, that's even better. Then people are just owning it themselves. Um, so, Jeff, thanks so much for doing this. I would say anybody who hasn't seen your work, definitely get on Facebook or LinkedIn, whatever your preference is, and follow his posts. They're always really good. I think it's a great testimony to having courage and sharing your point of view and just not worrying about it. And if you share your point of view thoughtfully, um, people are going to be interested. So I think it's pretty awesome to see how that page has grown over time, and now you've got the book and the other good things that are coming from it. So it's that's really pretty cool. And I would just say it's a pleasure to get to know you, and hopefully we'll run across each other in person one of these days soon.
Love to, would love to have a chance to meet up in person, and yeah, hopefully work together someday. But thanks so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. Jeff Siegler, thanks again. Take care.